the rumble, a jolt, a shake. Oklahoma became the most active earthquake state with hundreds of seismic events appearing from almost nowhere.
Earthquakes are being felt frequently, and I lived in those areas. I'd be worried.
And people are worried.
There's zero warning for these events. It's something that we have to be prepared for at all times right now in Oklahoma.
Could the big one be just around the corner?
There has been no issue that's come before this commission that is as important as this one.
But what is causing all the shaking?
It's very hard to sit in a location in Oklahoma and not be within some distance of an injection well that's reasonably close to you.
The amount of energy we're applying through frac jobs or even underground injection is not adequate to cause an earthquake where the stresses and strains don't already exist.
So what is fracking, and does the oil industry play any role in the earthquakes?
The strength of the energy sector and the role that it plays in Oklahoma's economy has made this the most challenging environment in which to address this concern.
As science and society collide, can the shaking stop? And what is the solution?
Is it possible to get rid of the earthquakes in Oklahoma?
Yes.
With dozens of earthquakes rattling Oklahoma each month, Fox 25 is focusing on your concerns. I'm Wendy Suarez.
And I'm Mike Brooks. Fox 25 is hosting a Your Voice, Your Future town hall meeting. A panel of experts will address your questions on Oklahoma earthquakes. Is fracking to blame? Now you can join the conversation on Facebook or Twitter by using the hashtag Your Voice, Your Future. We may even include your questions as part of our discussion.
Our panelists tonight include Steve Everly, team lead and national spokesman for Energy in Depth.
State Representative Jason Murphy from Oklahoma's District 31. Matt Skinner, Public Information Officer for the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, and Austin Holland, State Seismologist.
Now let's join our town hall moderator, Mark Hyman, at the Kerr-McGee Auditorium at Oklahoma City University.
We're live at the KOKH Auditorium on the campus of Oklahoma City University. Good evening. I'm Mark Hyman, host of Behind the Headlines. Thank you for joining us. One argument is that fracking is to blame for the increase in earthquakes in Oklahoma. Another argument is that there are previously unknown faults that are to blame. Earthquakes and fracking. Tonight we talk about it. Now, you met our panel in the opening video. And as you can see here, we've got a lot of folks in our live audience anxious to ask a lot of questions. But you at home can also join us in this important discussion. Fox 25 investigative reporter Phil Cross is manning our social media desk. He'll explain how you can join the debate. Phil?
Thanks, Mark. That's right. You can join along if you're watching live. You can tweet us using the hashtag Your Voice, Your Future. We've got the feed up here. If you're in the audience, you can join along as well, or you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/FoxOKC. You can like our page, post a question to that, and we will share those questions and comments as we go on throughout the night and try to get you an answer. Mark?
Thank you, Phil. Now, this is a town hall. It's all about getting your questions asked and answered by our panel of experts. But the first opportunity tonight is not going to go to our panel of experts, but it's going to go to the live audience here. I'm going to ask the question of you, and we're going to get right into this discussion. So I'd like you to respond with the sound of applause. Your two choices and answers are yes and no. Please respond with applause to this statement. Hydraulic fracking is to blame for the recent increase in Oklahoma earthquakes. Those who believe yes, please applaud. Those who believe no, please applaud. Well, we've got enthusiastic yes and no's from the live audience. Let's challenge our panel by a show of hands. Is hydraulic fracking to blame for the increase in earthquakes in Oklahoma? If you believe yes, please raise your hand. For the panelists, if you believe no, please raise your hand. So we have 2 no's and 2 abstentions. Let's go right to the live audience, sir. If you step over here for a moment, please join me. We're going to go to the live audience with our first question of the evening. Thank you for joining us, sir. Please tell us who you are, where you live, and what is your question.
Okay, my name is Bill Hugos, and I live here in Oklahoma City. And my question, I think, is for Austin. You work for OU, the Geological Center, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, 2 weeks ago, it was reported, I'm not sure if it was you or not, that whoever it was had a meeting with David Boren and Harold Hamm down there, and, quote, had coffee with them. Is that true? Was that you?
That's true, yes.
Okay. What did you discuss during the, quote, coffee meeting?
Well, I was hoping to discuss science, as I'm a scientist. When I got there, Harold Hamm was not there at the meeting. So President Boren and I had a good discussion, and he expressed to me that as a university employee, we have the academic freedoms of a university employee. And when Harold Hamm then joined us for the meeting, he expressed the same thing to Harold Hamm. Harold Hamm wanted to get to know who I was. He asked a lot of questions about me and expressed his concerns about discussions about triggered seismicity within the state of Oklahoma. It was actually quite a cordial meeting. I was a little bit nervous for it, but it was pretty much a cordial meeting on just some coffee and exchanging of a few ideas. It was quite brief, actually.
I hope you paid for the coffee. Let's go to our next audience member question. Sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Mason Mungle. I live in Norman. I'm president of the Oklahoma NARO chapter. If the depths of...
What is the NARO chapter?
That's the Royalty Owners Association for Oklahoma.
Okay.
If these earthquakes are 3 miles or deeper in the Earth's crust, and fracking or disposal wells are at a shallower depth, are they causing these type of events?
Well, let's start with Mr. Holland.
So we certainly see that the earthquakes are occurring generally much deeper than the oil and gas activities within the state. But that's not unexpected. We often see that in cases of triggered and induced seismicity. So it doesn't rule out the possibility that we can be seeing earthquakes caused by fluid injection in the subsurface.
Mr. Early, anything to add to this?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Early, anything to add?
Mr. Skinner.
Mr. Everly, I'm sorry, my apologies, Mr. Everly.
Sorry. That's Mr. Everly.
I just had about fifth panelist. I created one out of thin air. Mr. Everly, I apologize.
I mean, I would second what Mr. Holland just said there about, some of the studies that have gone on with induced seismicity have looked at, if you're gonna trigger seismicity, it could be in the same zone, it could be deeper. There is obviously a lot of nuance within that, and it has to be kind of on a site-by-site basis. You can't just say because it was at this depth or not at this depth, then it definitely isn't triggered or it definitely is. You have to look at it on an individual basis.
And let me follow up with Mr. Skinner. Are there any policies or procedures in place so that if there's evidence or suggestion or suspicion that there might be a relationship between a particular well or a particular activity and an earthquake, or is there something in place in which there's an immediate stop to that activity? How's that done at the state level? Are you familiar with that?
The short answer is yes. Having said that, that's not a final answer. We do not consider the systems we have in place that have been developed over the past 2 years to be a final answer to the situation in any way. This is an ever-evolving issue. And for us, the forefront are the disposal wells, and that's what we have to get our hands around in order to deal with this. For the agency, we're not involved in the debate over cause. We are focused on what does the data show that we have to do based on what would be prudent and what's a risk-based management approach. And the answer to that, quite frankly, continues to change. And so we continue to evolve our systems, but we do have systems in place.
And before I go to the next question, I'm going to bring Representative Murphy into the conversation. On this topic in general, can you characterize what kind of discussions are taking place within the legislature right now? Are there any particular committee hearings taking place, any kind of investigations to get more information so the legislature can do whatever they're going to do?
So this last fall, in October, I joined with State Representative Corey Williams in holding a legislative study so that we could introduce some of the panelists here tonight to the legislators and have an explanation of how the state has responded to the issue, and specifically, as Mr. Skinner alluded, the criteria-based decision-making the Corporation Commission is engaging in as it seeks to look at these on a case-by-case basis and make criteria-based decision as opposed to, say, a knee-jerk reaction or an unscientifically supported decision. And I think that's been one of my main goals in the legislative environment, and certainly back with my constituency, which certainly feels this on an almost daily basis now, to let them know that while state officials can't necessarily have a knee-jerk reaction, they are working hard and making criteria-based decision, and I think we're starting to see the effects of those decisions.
And a quick follow-up, on this particular issue, regardless of what side the constituents take on this issue, can you give us a sense of where this rises in terms of the issues constituents are concerned about? Is it low priority? Is it high priority? Is it somewhere in the middle?
So it will vary, of course, based on where at in Oklahoma the constituent calls home. In the constituency that I represent, I can tell you that it is now, without a doubt, the #1 issue of discussion, the first issue that I personally hear about. In the legislature as a whole, that's going to be reflected as well. A majority of legislators don't have this issue coming from their constituents just yet, but I can tell you that those of us who are in these areas, we hear about it and we know of its importance.
We've already had some very good questions coming from our live audience. Before we check with social media, I want to get one more question in from our live audience here. Sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
Sure, I'm Johnson Bridgewater, and I live in Oklahoma City. So we've had articles published in National Geographic, Scientific American, Science Magazine, Geology Magazine, and officials in the states of Ohio, Arkansas, and Kansas have all seen a link between earthquakes and induced, as known as induced seismicity and the use of injection wells. I would like to ask you all if you do or do not believe that there is a direct link in Oklahoma between the over 500 earthquakes we had last year and the use of injection wells to dispose of wastewater.
Mr. Everly?
In terms of some of the examples, I think the science shows that there is likely an induced cause. I'm not going to disagree with that. I don't know, do you want me to elaborate or just sort of
Please
go through with that? One of the challenges with this issue is that we often get into a conversation of, do you or do you not think that there is induced seismicity? And the outcome of that is if you say yes, then that means every earthquake that happens near oil and gas operations was obviously induced. And the scientific situation is far more complex than that. There's a lot more nuance. But to answer your question directly, induced seismicity is a thing. It is something that scientists well understand, and that can include wastewater injection as it comes from oil and gas production.
Mr. Holland, can you join this discussion?
Sure. So I would like to point out that there are articles we at the OGS have published documenting cases of induced seismicity. We clearly believe induced seismicity is something we need to be concerned with here in Oklahoma. It appears quite likely that most of the seismicity that we're seeing within northern and north central Oklahoma is most likely due to this wastewater disposal. We've gone from having about 1.5 magnitude 3 or greater earthquakes each year to more than 2 magnitude 3 earthquakes each day at our current rates. So very dramatic rate increase. We're looking at 2 orders of magnitude. Just really, it's hard to explain this as a natural variation. It gets a lot more challenging, though, when you start drilling into some of these areas and trying to understand what is going on, because the geology is very complex. But clearly we recognize the potential for induced seismicity, and quite honestly, the Oklahoma Geological Survey is just busy doing our core function of monitoring and reporting the seismicity so that other researchers around the country and the public are aware of the earthquakes that are occurring and can use that information.
And a quick follow-up, the gentleman mentioned over 500 earthquakes last year. I want to make certain we're correct on this. He was referring to typically magnitude 3 and larger. There actually were significantly more earthquakes of lower magnitude as well. Do you have an idea what those numbers were in 2014?
Yeah, so we reported more than 5,000 events. That means we had enough time to get through those events and look at them. We know of about another 5,000 to 6,000 more that our automatic system triggered on that we didn't have time to locate. So roughly 10,000 earthquakes that we know about just last year alone.
Thank you. Now, We're about 15 minutes in tonight's live event. I've had a lot of great questions that have been asked, but the viewers have been weighing in for days now on this particular topic. So let's check with our social media anchor. Phil, what do you have for us?
Well, Mark, like you said, we have had a lot of comments over the past few days as we're looking into this earthquake issue and any sort of connection to oil or gas exploration and what that might be. We have a few comments here from our Facebook page. Twyla Pettis wrote, "Mother Nature is the cause." Fred Martin said the question of whether or not the industry is connected at all is a waste of time because it is not fracking. However, there is still a lot of curiosity out there. Cindy Prian wrote, "I am curious as to what is causing the earthquakes. I remember all the drilling in the 80s. We didn't have any quakes back then." But the big question comes from Kelly McDonald, who says it should be a foregone conclusion that wastewater injection wells are causing the quakes. The science consistently shows that, but she asked, why hasn't the industry been regulated properly to control it, and who is going to pay for the ongoing property damage caused by those earthquakes? Maybe we can get an answer for her, Mark.
I want to bring Mr. Skinner back in the conversation. I certainly want to spend all of our time with just two of our panelists, but there was a premise that was brought up in one of the comments that, is this a matter of nature that's occurring? And there's certainly hydraulic fracking, there's wastewater injection wells here in the state of Oklahoma. We've seen an increase in earthquakes. But there's also this taking place in other jurisdictions, North and South Dakota, and they haven't seen the same number, even close to the number of changes in earthquakes. Have you had conversations with your counterparts in the other state corporations at the other level to compare notes to see why do we see this change here in Oklahoma that's so dramatic, but North Dakota doesn't see it?
We do have a constant dialogue under what's called the States First Initiative that we were part of the original group for. Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, Arkansas got together, all of us concerned about seismicity, to try to more formally swap information and what obviously every state differs. Most importantly, every state's law differs, and but we certainly share information on that. Also, of course, we work very closely with Austin as well, and I would defer to him as to possible theories as to why. Our concern is the fact that it is happening, that disposal wells are, and there's broad agreement on this, need to be looked at, and we're going to go from there. So as to what may be happening that a seismologist can address as to the difference between the states, I would defer to Austin.
That sounds like a cue to you, Mr. Holland.
So earlier you asked the question at the beginning, and it was actually a loaded question, because you asked if the earthquakes were caused by hydraulic fracturing or natural causes. Well, it turns out you can't have triggered earthquakes from oil and gas activity if you don't have naturally occurring faults that are already just about ready to have earthquakes. That's what the general requirement that it takes to have these triggered earthquakes. And so we're looking at a contribution of Mother Nature, of our Earth, and its capability to have earthquakes, potentially combined with different perturbations from fluid injection to possibly cause earthquakes.
And I don't want to spend all the evening with you, Mr. Holland, although you're doing a great job, but in the research for this, one of the things we found in Fox 25 is it appears as though we know a lot less about faults on this continent than perhaps I might have thought of weeks ago. People like you, do you have a sense, can you quantify how knowledgeable we are or unknowledgeable we are about what lies beneath us so that we're surprised because we don't know what's there?
Yes, it's remarkable how complex the geology in Oklahoma is. When I first got here, I was amazed that there wasn't some really nice, complete fault data set for the state of Oklahoma. So one of our major initiatives is begin to capture all the faults that have been documented in published literature. The Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association member companies gave us a large data set of faults they contributed to help our understanding of faults in the subsurface. Our greatest challenge in knowing where these faults are is the fact that they're deep within the earth. And so we can't see them. We don't have nice ways to just look inside the earth and see these. So we have to figure it out through different means. Sometimes faults will stand out, and sometimes they'll be very hard to see.
And if I may follow, thanks to Austin's work in that regard, contributions from all quarters, including the industry, we have, for the first time, now have, Austin turns it into a product that we can use. And we have instituted, as of May of 2014, a yellow light permitting system. That wouldn't be possible without this data. So now, if someone puts in an application to have a disposal well, it goes to an individual who reviews that in terms of where are the stressed faults, where's the seismicity occurring, what's happening. We're able to actually look underground, and under our current process, always subject to change, if you're within 3 miles of a stressed fault, if you're right on top of a fault, that'll be a red light. You're not going to be able to proceed. We can't deny someone due process. They can go to court and they can argue about it. The operators have never done that. They've simply said, all right, we'll find another place. And then we have other restrictions. If you go forward, you're going to have to agree to language that takes into account the possibility of induced seismicity, and that's part of your operating language. All that wouldn't be possible without Austin's work.
We're back to the live audience. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Mary Francis, and I live in Norman, Oklahoma. And my question probably is more directed at the Representative Murphy. There are several bills right now in front of him in the session which would prevent cities from exercising their home rule constitutional authority. That would be Article 18, Section 3C, which gives cities the opportunity to protect their citizens' health, safety, and welfare by writing ordinances and enforcing those. And that's exactly what the city of Norman and the city of Stillwater are trying to do, protect the citizens' health, safety, and welfare. We understand the Corporation Commission has the right to regulate oil companies. We're trying to protect citizens' health, safety, and welfare as we are constitutionally authorized to do.
So your question is, where does that stand in terms of those
And
that
that's
legislation?
what I want to know. How, where is that legislation, and what do you perceive will happen in the legislature if any of that passes?
Representative?
So we're at the midpoint of the legislative session, or nearing the midpoint of the legislative session, and that specific proposal did win approval in the House of Representatives. I think the timing is unfortunate for that proposal. As the Corporation Commission is working through the criteria and working out the issue, I think the legislature should probably strongly avoid, especially interfering with local level decision making in this area. I don't want to handicap that, but that is an issue if you feel strongly about that. It's certainly important to contact your legislators and let them know. I believe there were about 20 some of us who did vote no on the proposal, and so it wasn't a unanimous vote or anything like that. There's certainly opportunity for that not to go through this year, and that's my hope, that it will stop and that we can continue to look at the Corporation Commission's work and understand that if local governments want to look at that as well and maybe use some of their local level decision making, that's certainly appropriate at this time.
And I want to follow up with Mr. Everly. I'm going to put you in the spot for a moment because your organization is national in focus. Do you see this elsewhere, some conflict between state legislation, state law versus local ordinances, local policies? Is this something that isn't specific to Oklahoma?
Yeah, there is a similar effort in Texas right now. I live in Dallas. And you know, my organization, Energy in Depth, we don't lobby, so we're not supporting or opposing any particular legislation. What I can tell you is that there is often a conflict in terms of typically a state regulatory body is put in place to regulate the industry. That's how it's been for 100 years, and they have the experience to do that. The US EPA often defers to them, and some of these things are being, the short answer is these things are being ironed out in different legislators across the country, and it gets to, do cities have the resources to regulate this? Do they have the people in place to regulate this properly? Are you creating additional problems, or should it remain with the state? Just more questions to answer, I guess, that unfortunately I probably didn't do a great job of doing.
You did a great job. We're back to the live audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Casey Holcomb. I'm from Norman, Oklahoma. My first question is, how do you tell which injection well or fracking operation has triggered a particular earthquake? Is there a way to do that, and what do you have to do in order to do that? My other question is, states like Arkansas and Ohio, with their equivalents of the Corporation Commission, have taken swift action to protect public health and safety from seismic events. So what is the difference, either politically, geologically, or otherwise? What is the difference between the culture, political climate in Oklahoma that is preventing that sort of action from taking place?
Before I go to Mr. Holland, I actually want to bring Mr. Skinner back in the conversation. Are there wells, whether the wastewater or others, that are closed for a significant period of time, or permanently closed because there's evidence or belief that they've affected or caused earthquakes?
We do have those wells. They were voluntarily shut in by the operators, but yes, it was over seismic concerns. If I may address
Please.
Mr. Holcomb's question, the big difference between the states is legal. Arkansas Commission has authority to do things that we just don't have that authority to do. It's not something we have the legal authority to do, such as their moratorium. The Ohio, which I am familiar, obviously they differ in terms of geology and whatnot. We have, we're in close contact with Ohio over what they've done out there. But again, it's really more of a legal issue as to what can be done. Oklahoma is a state that was founded by populists. There are a lot of checks and balances. That's not an excuse. It just means that we have to operate in a different legal environment in terms of where the limits of our jurisdiction are.
Mr. Holland, anything to add on this?
Well, I can speak to how do we distinguish induced seismicity from naturally occurring seismicity, and how do we target certain wells. That's actually a interesting challenge scientifically. With hydraulic fracturing, it's often very simple because you have these very strong temporal correlations that can be used. When you're talking about a disposal well, we don't have a magic bullet because remember, these faults are near failure to begin with. And so we can't instantly, just from looking at the recordings of the earthquake itself that we're making at the surface, tell the difference between a natural earthquake and a induced earthquake. So a lot more research has to go into it. And those can be quite time consuming. And that's why we're working with collaborators from around the country and even the world to try and understand this better.
One of the things Mr. Holcomb mentioned in his question, I want to bring the representative back in the conversation. I guess I'd characterize it as the elephant in the room, because he talked about political issues, and rumor has it that oil and gas is kind of a big deal here in Oklahoma. In all honesty, and without trying to be flip about it, can you address at least how significant that is? Because it is a big chunk of the economy here, and it certainly has to weigh heavily in the minds of legislators, because it's another one of those issues that's a balancing act.
So the energy sector accounts for what some would say is 1 in every 6 Oklahomans' livelihood. 1 in 6 Oklahomans' jobs depends on the health of the energy sector. When you really think about it, you have to realize what our state officials have to do here. There aren't easy solutions. The political will is not moratoriums and absolute across-the-board prohibitions. This situation, and our Oklahoma state officials who are in the middle of it, have the unique challenge of being in the strongest energy sector political environment while having the greatest degree of seismic activity. And they have to act in a criteria-based, data-driven, deliberative manner. And this is the Oklahoma solution. And part of my job has been to highlight that work. It is ongoing. It will continue to be ongoing, and we will continue to see that progress. And I believe we will reach an Oklahoma solution to this. And that is the great challenge that faces our state government officials that those other venues didn't necessarily have. And then, of course, you have the fact that so many permits have already been awarded. When there are hundreds of people who have a permit that entitles them to a livelihood, there has to be due process before that's taken away. In other venues where that wasn't the case, the solution was much, much easier. That's not the case here.
And just out of curiosity, I want to ask for the live audience here, because Fox 25 doesn't have a position on this particular issue, but it is obvious that oil and gas is a large part of the economy. Just out of curiosity, by a sound of applause, who here in some fashion works directly or indirectly in the oil and gas industry? If we go back to the live audience, sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Todd Taylor, and I'm from Oklahoma City. My question is for Mr. Holland. As we've seen the increase in seismicity and the magnitude, what is your viewpoint on the potential going forward that we'll see not only more earthquakes, but the potential for significant damage from a large magnitude earthquake?
That's actually a real concern of ours. So we've seen these rate increases of earthquakes that started in 2009 and then sort of continued along. In 2013 we had a record year, and then last year in 2014 we had a very large number of earthquakes. And we also, in 2014, last year, as the rate of earthquakes began to increase, we issued a press release with the USGS saying that with the increased frequency of earthquakes, we were more likely to have an earthquake of greater magnitude, potentially another damaging earthquake. And so we certainly are afraid that we could be, and our odds of having, our likelihood of having a larger damaging earthquake have gone up as the rate of earthquakes has increased. So we certainly encourage Oklahomans to prepare and know what to do during an earthquake. And we have pamphlets both in the hallway, and we have those same pamphlets available on our website at the earthquake page on the OGS website. So we encourage people to know what to do and how to prepare and protect their family during an earthquake.
And Representative, sadly, this is a state that gets hit far too often by tornadoes, and Oklahomans know how to prepare for that. Is there information available at the state level, much that Mr. Holland talked about, to help people prepare for that if there's a big one, for goodness sakes, that they know how to respond?
Sure, there are any number of sources that can easily be found online with the basic information that's needed, and several state agencies, potentially from the Corporation Commission to the Insurance Department, would offer that information. I would certainly agree that from a political perspective, the possibility of the large quake is certainly something that should, number one, be planned for. But for those of us who know the importance of the energy sector to Oklahoma, it's an event that, as we look forward, if that event does happen, it will be a cloud over the energy sector for the rest of our lifetimes. And I think those who are in the energy sector, who are responsible players, who have been working to provide the fault data and everything else, realize that that is a huge part that they must play to be those responsible players, because if those that are potentially irresponsible in the energy sector gain the upper hand and that large quake does happen, it will affect all of us, and it will affect us for many, many years.
And we're back to the live audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
Earl Hatley. I live in Veneta. I'm a landowner in Payne County. And I have my question really is twofold, because you're talking twofold up there, but you raised an important issue. Representative, state legislature is working very hard to chase out energy sector jobs in the renewable energy industry, so that's why we're stuck with one industry for energy. Mr. Holland made the statement that the fractures in our strata that are causing the earthquakes are about to go anyway, and so the injection wells are just releasing what's already about to happen at some point. But that's not my research, and that's not what I'm hearing from reputable geologists around the country and here in Oklahoma. A lot of these faults are dormant, and they're being set off by the high pressure and the high volume of liquids that's being injected on a regular basis in these cluster areas. And so the question is, given this stoplight system that you have going, one well at a time that you're utilizing to target this well and that well, how are you going to be able to regulate all of these wells in these cluster earthquake areas in Payne County, Oklahoma County, Logan County, Garfield County, Noble County,
All right, let me
Grant,
see if we can answer that question.
When you know that there are so many wells in these counties, when the people in these counties want a moratorium on a larger scale than one well at a time.
All right, let's see if we can get an answer from that one. So we'll start with Mr. Skinner. So, first of all, do you have the resources you need in order to do this?
No.
What do you need?
Our
Is it people?
resources are extremely strained. Now, do we have the resources? Are we working as hard as we can? But I think your answer, your question begs, could we use more resources? Yes, absolutely. We're giving everything we have to this. But back to Earl's question, which is an excellent one. The whole issue of this well-by-well approach, which is a model that basically has worked very well for us when it comes to water protection. It has become increasingly apparent to staff that it poses issues when it comes to trying to get our hands around the swarms. In interest of full disclosure, I'm one of Representative Murphy's constituents, and my house is rattled quite hard and quite often. So we fully understand the need. So when I talk about any systems tonight, this is an ever-evolving process. But that issue that he raises is very much central to, as we look not even far down the road, it's a key issue for us. How do we broaden this out? And how do we go forward? Not discounting a well-by-well approach, but what more do we need to bring into the mix?
And just a quick follow-up, can you give us an idea what triggers the process so that if there is an earthquake, and again, Mr. Holland talked about how there are thousands and thousands, there's so many that perhaps we don't notice, but the ones that are recognized that we notice, how does that process start so it comes to your attention so you can scrutinize an area to see if there are potential wells involved in that?
Well, most basically, if there's a 4.0 or greater earthquake, it could be something a little less. We've actually done this in areas that haven't had a 4.0. We draw a 10-kilometer circle around that quake. That becomes an area of interest. We do sweeps through the area, concentrating on the disposal wells. The initial concentration is on Arbuckle wells because that's the state's deepest formation. And Austin could talk more technically about that. So what we're looking for is any kind of anomaly, regardless of whether it might be linked to seismicity or not. And those anomalies have to be addressed if we find them. When water protection was our only concern, then there would be minor infractions that had to be corrected. They'd be given time. Now it's shut in, fix it. And at the same time, we're obviously looking for other issues. That's the initial response. We have about 32 areas of interest under the present system. The other thing we do now is yellow light permitting, where, as I explained, you have to agree to language that takes into account the possibility of induced seismicity if you even want to put a well there.
I want to bring Mr. Holland back in the conversation, and after that I have to check in with our social media anchor and find out what our viewers think of all this. If you have a map, or if you had a map, could you circle areas that might be of concern to seismologists today, where you might want to focus more attention, Mr. Holland, just based on a number of factors?
Absolutely, and the Corporation Commission has been given, the areas. It's pretty obvious. You draw the seismicity on a map. You know where the problem areas are. It's really obvious. We have a report that shows where the 2014 seismicity is that was just released a couple weeks ago. Our map with all the earthquakes from 2014, anywhere you have the large clusters of earthquakes is a pretty good starting point.
A lot of great questions here. No earthquakes at the moment, but the producers tell me that our social media is blowing up with people who want to join in on this debate. So let's check in with our social media anchor. Phil, what's the latest?
That's right, Mark. We are getting a lot of response here, both on our Facebook page, on Twitter. Here's the look up here as people just using the Your Voice, Your Future hashtag, asking some of these questions we've asked and answered as we've gone along. Here are some people calling saying that we need a moratorium on fracking. Other people saying that this is simply continental drift and it's a natural occurrence. Gayla Freeman, though, asked, does the oil and gas industry think there is an infinite space in the earth for wastewater disposal? We had another question on our Facebook page earlier talking about the Arbuckle Formation, where this is coming into. People want to know is how much space is available for wastewater injection, and is it getting filled up? Mark?
I'm going to go with Mr. Everly. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Do I think that there's an infinite space in the earth for injection? No, there's finite space in the earth. What was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
If you repeat the question, Phil.
Yeah, if the Arbuckle is close to being full.
Oh, I would have no idea of knowing that. I know that the Arbuckle, as one of the many formations that's targeted for disposal, is done so because it can receive water. It receives water very well. I would probably defer to Mr. Holland if he is not out of breath already, but in terms of the technical components of that. But one of the reasons why you inject water into some of these formations is because they have been pretty good at trapping water at depth for millions of years. And some of these formations actually are where you've actually produced the oil and gas from, so you're injecting it back into the same formation. It just kind of varies well by well.
And Mr. Everly, I'm with you, actually. I'm trying to give Mr. Holland a breather there, so we're not going to him all the time. And on that note, before I go to this young lady, is Mr. Gordon Amini in the audience? Okay, so I want to get to you in a moment. I want to go to this young lady first. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
I'm Jody Harlan. I'm from Yukon, Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is an oil and gas state. We have a network of pipelines that converge in Cushing and go south to the Gulf. My question is, what happens if one of the earthquakes breaks these pipes and our water supply is compromised, contaminated? Who pays for the cleanup? The oil industry or the taxpayers like me? And what is our plan for a disaster like that if it's bad enough that the water supply is compromised in Oklahoma?
You know, I didn't ask you to ask that question, but that's great because I'd asked for Mr. Amini. We're going to go to him in a moment because insurance issues is something we haven't addressed yet. I want to go back with the representative for a moment. Who's responsible? Who pays? And is there anything else we haven't considered when it comes to the after the fact, the damage, the cleanup, the cost, and so forth?
So as the seismic events become larger, the true cost is very hard to put an estimate on, but it affects many, many areas of life. We can certainly speak to the road and bridge issue in Oklahoma. And as you have those larger events, it puts that responsibility on our transportation personnel to then check and see were property assets damaged in that event. And certainly there will be a cost to that just in the inspection alone. If there are no large consequences, just the time and effort that the responsible personnel have to inspect those water lines, gas lines, or road and bridge assets is going to be built into the system and inevitably paid by the rate and the taxpayers.
And I kind of blindsided this gentleman. First of all, thank you very much for agreeing to chat for a moment. This is, well, first of all, tell us who you are and what do you do?
I'm Gordon Amini, and I'm with the legal section at the State Insurance Commissioner's Office.
And so the reason why I kind of blindsided you here for a moment is because when damage occurs, let's say to a personal home, questions may arise as to who's responsible. I could envision an insurance company saying, well, no, earthquake, it's not a natural act. It was caused by hydraulic fracking, so therefore it's a man-made caused disaster, and we don't pay. Can you just talk in general terms about what can the homeowners do, what are their avenues, what's available at the state level, so that they can achieve proper resolution when they have damage?
Sure. You're right about that. Most homeowners' policies, in fact, all I know of, exclude coverage for earthquake damage. You can buy an endorsement from your insurance company in almost every case that will provide earthquake coverage. Now, the question being is whether after you have earthquake coverage on your home, for example, whether or not there's an exclusion there for man-made versus naturally occurring seismic events. That's insurance lingo. Anyway, the idea there being that, if the damage to your home is caused by another person or company, then they should be responsible for the loss. If it's caused by natural events, then the insurance should cover it. Now, the problem is we've all seen just through this discussion here today, and it sounded to me like it was about evenly split. There's a lot of uncertainty about, certainly in regard to any particular earthquake, what was the causation. One other last and more current note, I noticed there are some companies now that are selling insurance policies which do not exclude earthquake damage caused by fracking or injection wells or any other oil and gas activity. So the thing to do is talk to your agent. We certainly are available at the State Insurance Department to try to help, and because that coverage is now coming into the market.
And one further thing, we anticipate seeing some more movement on this issue because there is a current case before the state Supreme Court. I'm not asking you to comment on the merits of the case, but do you see this as potentially shedding more light on what avenues are available to homeowners, depending on what the Supreme Court rules?
Well, I would expect that certainly it'll shed some light. There's a lot of questions that arise, however, having to do with, this is always going to be an argument between experts on both sides of the case, kind of like medical negligence cases. Both sides have their expert witnesses, and of course this is going to be that same kind of thing. We'll just have to wait and see what the court decides.
I want to bring the representative back in the conversation because even though I may look as like just a lovable TV personality, I care about state spending as well. And so where does the legislature stand with these issues in terms of whatever this court decides could have a significant impact on state finances? And you're familiar with the case I'm talking about.
Are you referring to whether or not they're standing to file litigation against energy sector companies?
I want to make sure I have the name right. Was it Larder? Larder versus, and I'm sorry, I don't have my notes. Larder versus Old Dominion, which is, the short version is that the plaintiff is alleging that wastewater injection wells caused earthquake and the Prague earthquake that injured her and caused damage to her home. And so depending on what the court rules, it could open up a lot of potential litigation, could increase costs or not, depending on how the court rules. But when we talk about resolving these issues, we talk about insurance, we talk about warning, we talk about training, it often comes down to more money. And I can't imagine the governor and the legislature are keen about raising more taxes and spending more money.
No, I think to the point, I will say that every so often this is one of the calls that comes in where a constituent says, I know this damage was caused by an earthquake, I want to do something about it, can I file a legal action? And so I do think that depending on the outcome of whether or not a person has standing to do that and whether or not that's really an avenue for them, that there are plenty on the sideline who are waiting to see that outcome, and you'll see potentially a good deal of litigation because of it. And that, again, I think speaks to the importance of those within the energy sector who are the good players and who are working, continuing to gain the upper hand in the energy sector and positioning the industry well so that that potential nightmare situation does not evolve.
By the way, my apologies. The plaintiff in that case was Sandra Ladra, so the case is Ladra versus New Dominion. My apologies to Ms. Ladra. Thank you for joining us. Tell us who you are, where you live, and what is your question?
I'm Angela Spots. I live between Cushing and Stillwater. I am one of the 5 out of 6 who do not benefit from oil and gas, and my home is breaking. So the liability question is very frustrating in how it's being formed tonight and wavering. So that's very disturbing to me as a homeowner. But my bigger concern is national security. Watching what happens under Cushing, I really do not understand that any disposal wells should be permitted at all near the Cushing, largest pipeline tank farm in the world, that New York relies on our fuel from there. And I'm kind of shocked that we're not getting a bigger discussion on that. And I do want people to understand, many of us, our homes are broken and we will have no assistance in refixing them or repairing them. Many of them are not actually repairable. So this liability issue needs to be discussed further, and I would like that to be taken a little more seriously than just the economy of the state.
And thank you. One of the scientific papers that's been published in the last several months actually addressed a concern about that underground storage in the Cushing area, that it could portend a significant ecological disaster if it's affected by an earthquake. Anything to add to this, Mr. Holland?
No, absolutely. A very large earthquake underneath Cushing would be potentially very bad. Clearly, those tank farms are held to a more rigorous design standard, but I don't know what all those design standards are. But clearly that would be a pretty big ecological disaster if there was a large earthquake immediately underneath Cushing.
Mr. Skinner, anything to add on that issue with Cushing specifically?
In terms of Cushing, that is one of our areas of interest. It would be, I will say, problematic at this point for someone to put a disposal well into that area. They have had 2 back-to-back 4.0s, I think slightly above 4.0. We have taken action on 1 well there, and obviously once it becomes an area of interest, then it becomes at best a yellow light permit area. We have not received any applications for any disposal wells. I can tell you that any applications would obviously be given even more than the normal rigorous treatment given Cushing and its seismic history.
And just for the benefit of our audience, that was the U.S. Geological Survey had a paper that was out and certainly raised some concerns about the underground storage in Cushing. And an interesting point, again, here at Fox 25, we're not taking a position on this particular discussion, but there was a statement in there that we found particularly interesting. Specifically, it said, it was talking about the fault lines in Oklahoma and the pressures they're receiving from really intercontinental from both the east and west coast. And it mentioned that Oklahoma was, this is the optimal orientation for producing strike-slip faulting, which in my mind, I understood to be a potential big one. Am I right, Mr. Holland? That's what they were saying in their paper, that is a possibility, and I didn't weight it how significant that was.
Yeah, so I'm actually a co-author on that paper. I'm a little further down the list. The USGS likes to take credit for everything they do, right? But no, the fact of the matter is we long recognize what fault orientations are the most likely to have earthquakes. We know these strike-slip faults, and we certainly can, with the seismicity, map out a fairly significant fault in the area as well as other map faults. So there's certainly reason for concern in many parts of the state that we could have potentially larger earthquakes.
All right, we're back to the live audience. Sir, step up here for a moment. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
Yes, Howard Bear from Norman, Oklahoma. We Oklahomans are very concerned about water in the state. Is there any threat to the groundwater supply from these injection wells?
Mr. Everly, what have you seen?
Well, just to kind of take a quick step back, and for those who don't know, an injection well is actually it's called a Class 2 well. It's categorized under the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And states that have standards that meet EPA's requirements or exceed them are given what's called primacy. So in this case, it would be the Corporation Commission here in Oklahoma that has primacy over the wells to regulate them primarily about concerns over groundwater. As it relates to seismicity and earthquakes, to my knowledge, and I can let Matt or Austin weigh in on this as well, to my knowledge, there haven't been any documented cases of any sort of groundwater contamination from well integrity failure as a result of earthquakes here in Oklahoma. That's my understanding, but if Matt or Austin want to weigh in on any other components of that or nuances that I might be glossing over, I'll defer to them.
Well, we do conduct mechanical integrity tests on wells that we have concerns about because of seismicity. That is a very high concern of ours. And we haven't found a problem yet, but it's not something we're going to stop worrying about.
On that MIT test too, and some of the other things, I just want to point out that a lot of companies, a lot of operators have 24-hour continuous monitoring, and what that allows them to do is if there's any sort of potential loss of integrity, they can respond to that, potentially close the well, and respond to that within, basically immediately. So this kind of risk is not something that there's just a pipe in the ground and people just kind of hope for the best. There's a lot of science and technology that goes into just monitoring a well, much less drilling and operating it.
We're back to the live audience. Please remind us who you are.
Mason Mungle, Norman, Oklahoma. With any type of a fracking ban, what effect would that have on our mineral owners? We have a lot of mineral owners that have their income, they depend on royalties from their minerals, from older Oklahomans to all types of families.
I'll go back to you, Mr. Skinner. How does this impact mineral owners?
Well, I do need to stress that we've looked into bans, moratoriums, and for us, it's for the commission, as under the present reading of the law, it's not an option. But obviously, if you with shale plays, hydraulic fracturing is absolutely necessary for the shale to produce. Hydraulic fracturing has actually been a necessary part of the industry to make wells produce. It's called a completion technique in Oklahoma for almost 60 years. It's not new to Oklahoma. What is new to Oklahoma is horizontal drilling. But hydraulic fracturing is obviously a key component of oil and gas production in America.
I want to bring the representative back to the conversation. How does this impact what the legislature looks at in terms of, as they examine this issue? Because we tend to think of oil and gas, but what about the mineral rights owners?
Sure, there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of issues that come into this discussion, and that's why I think those of us who have constituencies that are affected by this have to act deliberatively, have to advance the concerns of that constituency and realize all of the moving parts that come around this issue that make it very complex. And so again, I think that's why it's so important that we emphasize the work the state is doing, systematically addressing this in a deliberative manner, so that we can show that those interests aren't unnecessarily harmed, that provide livelihoods for the different individuals involved, from jobs to mineral owner royalty payments on down. And so that's the importance for the deliberative and credible approach.
And Mr. Holland, you had something to add?
Yeah, I would like to stress the difference between wastewater disposal and hydraulic fracturing, because they're two very different processes. And I know some of the public have expressed that they don't care what the difference is. If they're feeling earthquakes, they want them to stop. The difference between hydraulic fracturing and wastewater disposal are key, though, to understanding and having an informed dialogue on this topic. So wastewater disposal occurs mostly from water that's produced along with oil and gas and then is disposed of deep within the earth. Most of our wastewater that's disposed of comes from the actual oil and gas production. It's produced water. It comes out with the production of oil and gas. Very small amounts of the water that's disposed of actually come from hydraulic fracturing. So it's kind of important to separate these two things. So if you're talking about shutting down disposal wells, you're talking about shutting down the producing wells that produce that water that goes along with it. It's just I think an important distinction to understand the difference between hydraulic fracturing and the wastewater disposal.
Mr. Everly, is there another way to dispose of that wastewater?
Disposal is something I know that the EPA has even said is a safe and inexpensive option for dealing with this, but companies are increasingly doing recycling in different parts. They're sourcing water from different areas and reducing water use. So there are options, and I know in Pennsylvania, I think the recycling rate is over 90%, but that's constrained by certain technology and certain geology in different areas. What works in Pennsylvania doesn't work in Texas, and neither of those will work in Oklahoma. So to answer your question, though, they are looking at a lot of technology. To get back to Mason's point just real quick, oftentimes this conversation gets framed between sort of, environmental interests and the energy industry. And I think what we see in this room is that, the concerns that we have here are not necessarily from environmental groups, right? These are homeowners, these are people who are very concerned about their property. But on the other side, it's not just the energy industry, it's private property owners, it's the mineral owners, and if you implement a ban,
And
you're taking away their rights.
Mr. Everett, I have to interrupt you for just a moment because I just have to say goodbye to our television viewers. This concludes our broadcast of the Town Hall. However, you can watch the program in its entirety at OKCFox.com. Make sure you watch this station's late news for coverage of the Town Hall and all the day's breaking news. I'm Mark Hyman. Thank you for joining us. Good night. Now, we can continue on with the rest of the program here because we're still live streaming. So if this young lady would join me up here for a moment. Tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name is Susan Schmidt. I'm from Oklahoma City. In Oklahoma City, we've been on water rationing for a long, long time. We've seen Lake Hefner, for instance, drop down to where the sailboats are sitting in the dirt. And yet, the oil and gas industry is permitted to use millions and millions of gallons of water, which is good drinkable water, every day, which is causing us tremendous problem in it. And then also, when it's injected and those cracks form, then that's the possibility of now polluting our groundwater. So we know that. We look at the little charts like the one here, and it shows that there was 1.6 earthquakes in 28 years, and then now starting in 2009, they just increased thousands and thousands of them. So it's pretty obvious for people who've lived around here what could be causing all this. Well, obviously, it's the fracking and the injection wells. So all this discussion, when something seems so simple, is reminiscent of the tobacco industry that went on for all those years trying to convince everybody that we needed to study it more and more and more, that cigarettes didn't cause cancer when in fact they did.
So your question is?
So my question is, why isn't the Corporation Commission, why isn't the legislature, why isn't the environmental department, why isn't everybody trying to protect the future interest of Oklahoma and not the oil and gas industry? Sure, a lot of people work for the oil and gas industry, but we could just as easily be working for other sustainable.
Let me see if I can
so
answer
why
your
aren't
question.
you doing more to protect and stop this from happening? All the damage, all the earthquakes, all the water, etc.
And before I cut her off, she was about to say she also wanted to thank Fox 25 for addressing this issue tonight. So, well, Mr. Skinner, you were first up. So she's concerned that the Corporation Commission should be doing more. Your thoughts, your feedback?
Well, in terms of the surface water, the water issues are controlled by the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, but use of the water and the fact that we've been in a drought for years certainly is concerning to the Commission. The commissioners have been very proactive, working with staff to encourage reuse and recycle of hydraulic fracturing water, which tends to be surface water, you're absolutely right, unlike produced water that comes out of the ground, comes from surface water. We don't permit that use, that's another agency, but we do want to, and we have, the commissioners have, worked hard to come up with rules that would encourage the reuse and recycle of that water to lessen the strain on the supplies.
And before I bring the representative in, I know you've got some thoughts on this topic because her concern is the state should be doing more. And then after you chat, I want to check back in with Phil to see what our viewers think because they're just as excited about this topic as our live viewers here. But the young lady's concern was that perhaps there should be more action taken at various state agencies to ensure the safety. What steps is the legislature taking that it hasn't already taken in order to ensure the safety of our communities and individuals?
Once again, of course, water use is quite complex. There are many interests, from farming interests to urban customers to the oil and gas sector. But inevitably, there's activity that balances that out, and if the drought increases and the supply lessens, I think you're going to see more and more focus on those technologies that allow for the recycling. Specifically, what we heard referenced earlier, it'll be our job as state policy leaders to continue to do whatever we can to lift regulatory barriers that may prohibit the recycling of those water products. And that's where sometimes it gets tricky because there may be federal regulations that is hard for us to address. But in the end, one of the best things we can do as policymakers is to look at those government actions and regulations that keep the industries from providing the solution as technology becomes more and more affordable and allows them to do so.
How much is the federal government working with the state of Oklahoma on this issue? Some, little, none, all? Both you and I will get Mr. Skinner to weigh in as well. Yes, Representative.
Obviously, you've heard numerous references to USGS. You'll constantly hear the back and forth between the federal and state counterparts, but certainly I will strongly make the case that it is always best policy when the actual power resides within the state agency equivalent, because then we can do something about it. And the voice of the people in this room can be heard. But when it's a federal regulation and the federal agency that is heavy-handed, our ability to have our voice heard is next to nothing. And that's why sometimes the one-size-fits-all approaches that we deal with from DC, such as potentially the regulations on the recycling, can keep what would otherwise occur in providing a solution from actually happening for years when it otherwise would happen, and provide a solution to an issue just like this one.
And Mr. Skinner, you addressed a short while ago that you don't have all the resources you need in order to carry out your assigned tasks. Are you getting assistance at the federal level? Can you use more? Do we need to speak to our congressional delegation to weigh in on this issue at the federal level?
We are getting assistance from the federal level. We work closely with Region 6 office out of Dallas with EPA, because that is the agency that oversees our jurisdiction over the injection well program. I know that just this week, well, actually it was last week, we've had a key EPA petroleum engineer who volunteered, was assigned and volunteered to help us get our hands around a lot of the issues that's been very difficult for us in terms of coming up with logistics, coming up with methods of dealing with them, identifying the problems. So that help has been invaluable. I also want to mention, certainly on the state level, the Oklahoma Secretary of Energy's office has been very proactive in trying and doing what they can to help.
You know, our live audience members here have been asking a lot of tough questions and actually making our panelists work hard for their money tonight, but they're not the only ones, because our viewers at home have a lot of their tough questions of their own they want to ask. So let's check our social media desk. Phil, what's the latest?
Mark, a lot of the questions are actually following along with some of the line of questioning that's coming from the audience members. So this kind of flow of this conversation is really continuing online. We do have a couple of questions that are related to the same issue. One comes from Ed Craven down in McLean County, asking what can be done to repair drinking wells if they become unsafe due to injection wells or earthquakes in the area. But a couple of questions are also focused on the larger question of is there anything that is controlling the state's response as far as corporate concerns or any political concerns, and how related or interrelated, if at all, is the Oklahoma Geological Survey and the Corporation Commission?
I want to go back to Mr. Skinner, because we've been talking a lot about earthquakes, but then there's those issues about water contamination. How does an individual start that process to say, I think my well water has been contaminated, I'd like to know who's responsible? And of course, Mr. Amini may be able to address it later in terms of what they need to do in terms of how they get that resolved financially. But how do they notify you, or do they notify you, or are you in the loop?
Oh, absolutely. This is something we deal with on a daily basis. Water protection has long been our #1 mandate. And so if someone thinks that there's oil and gas activity that has somehow impacted their water well, they call us. And we are the only agency that doesn't charge to test. And we'll come out, we'll look, we'll investigate, and we'll go from there. But it's something that we deal with all the time.
We're back to our live audience. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
I'm Carolyn Meyer, and I live in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I'm one of the 5 founding members of Stop Fracking Payne County. And my question is, I have seen in our little newspaper all the time in the legal section, I think this might be for you, Mr. Skinner, and there are public notices of hearings about wells that are injection wells or oil or gas wells that might be drilled. And I was wondering, if I were to come to one of those, would it do any good? Or is it just kind of like a little kangaroo type court thing where they listen and then they go ahead and say, okay, we're building it? So.
Well, it is a public court hearing, so obviously, yes, you can come, and I would encourage you to come. We do operate within a prescribed set of state law. So, and state law, obviously, is up to the legislature that can be changed. So there may be concerns you have that aren't part of the parameters that we have to look at. Nonetheless, I wouldn't just immediately assume that. And I would encourage all to take part in the process. And we have seen a broad response over the past few years to opening up the rulemaking process. A lot of the things that used to be not have all that many people at the table other than those that were directly involved. From stakeholder groups to mineral owners groups, they may be, the Sierra Club has been very active, and others from all walks of life. And I'd encourage everybody to take part in it.
Representative, I want to bring you back into the conversation. You've got groups like this that are local. Her mistake is reading the local newspaper, not watching the Fox 25 primetime news at 9, I might add. But certainly, if you have oversight, you've got to be concerned, or you want to be confident that any state organization, any state commission that puts out for public comment is going to receive comment, consider it before they make a decision.
Sure, I think it would be interesting to see the metrics on how many people appear at those hearings and actually have their voice heard. And what I would suspect that you'll find is in many cases, there may be no comments submitted at all. You can only imagine how that empowers a single person who does take the time to read the paper, to watch the news, to know when those hearings are, and just be there. Maybe not even to make comment, but to participate. It's an empowering process, and more people should do it.
Okay, we're running down towards the end here. Exhausted just about all the questions, I think, of our live audience, but this gentleman's joining us. Please tell us who you are, where do you live, and what is your question?
My name's Kim Hatfield. I live here in Oklahoma City, and we've heard a lot about the amount of water that's used in the fracking process. Could you tell us what percentage of the state's water use is used by the energy industry and where that ranks, and how it might compare with the amount of water, say, used to water golf courses?
Anyone have any information on it? Mr. Skinner?
I will turn to, I'm going to put Tim Baker on the spot, who is our oil and gas director. Tim, do you have any numbers on that?
If you stand up and join me for a moment. Want to get your handsome face on television, sir. And tell us who you are and what do you do?
My name is Tim Baker. I'm the Director of Oil and Gas for the Oil and Gas Conservation Division. And statewide, as far as oil and gas industry uses, about 2% of the state's water supply. So it's really pretty small on a statewide basis.
Okay, and any idea where that ranks with respect to, I suspect personal use might be near the top.
Yeah,
residents
domestic,
and so forth.
city water supplies are by far and away the highest usage. Irrigation would be next to that. But, I'm not the expert, but I do know the oil and gas portion is about 2% statewide.
Anything to add on this from the panel?
We've done some research on that, and I can just tell people, it's called, if I get the acronym right, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Their website has a lot of these graphs and charts and stuff that put this all into context, put the different industries, percentages, everything. We've done some research on this, so it is very helpful if you go onto their website.
Go ahead. And we're down to our lightning round. We've got a few lightning round questions left, so lightning round questions and answers. And please refresh us, your name again is?
Susan Schmidt in Oklahoma City. On that comment that only 2% of the water is used by the oil and gas industry, and that most of it's used by the city and then in agriculture. The big difference is when you bring in all this water into your house, you're drinking a little bit out of it and you're peeing some of it out, and then it's going down, flushing down your drain, and then it's going and it's being reprocessed and used what's called downstream. When the farmer uses it, he sprays it on his bushes and plants, and it grows something, and then it goes into the ground, it goes in the groundwater, and then it goes going to downstream.
Your question is?
That 2% is a very important 2% because it's being used up and then it's being contaminated. Now, in the future, there might be a way to take those millions of gallons and then reuse them, et cetera. They're not doing that now for very much. So that 2%, when you're running out of water and you're facing a drought, is extremely important, especially when you're contaminating it and it can no longer be used to drink. Do you agree?
Yep. I'm not sure anybody in the panels can disagree with you on anything. Please join us. And tell us your name again, please.
Angela Spots from Stillwater area. I'm curious, so is there any testing being done to know if the Arbuckle and the other formations are full? I believe since we've had 183 plus threes as of today, to do those kind of tests. So I'm kind of curious, are we looking at what if the possibility of these formations are been full over the 70 years of injecting?
Mr. Holland?
Yeah, I was going to turn to that one.
So this is actually an interesting question. There are some areas of the state where it may be full. Probably the best indication, though, is the actual injection pressures that are being used to inject the water into the subsurface. When you're dealing with a formation that is, quote, saturated, it requires pressure to inject that water. And a lot of the water that's being injected, and significantly high pressures, a lot of water that's being injected in these disposal wells is being injected on a vacuum or near vacuum, so it's just overcoming the friction. And so there's a good indication that the Arbuckle is not, quote, full. That doesn't mean that you can't have triggered seismicity, because you can still change the pressures in the subsurface. But there's a lot of indication that the Arbuckle is not full in many areas.
We're back to the live audience. Sir, please tell us who you are, where you live, and what is your question?
My name is Garland Pruitt. I live in Choctaw, Oklahoma. I'm curious as to whether or not anybody's going to take responsibility for the damaging of the homes, the breaking of the foundations, the cracking of the ceilings, and I know they've had some comments concerning that if it wasn't a natural, it was man-made. So you're just leaving people on their own. And my other question is, with the shortage of water that they're having in California, do you think over a period of time, in addition to the contamination, that we could have that shortage also if we continue to frack?
All right, let's go to the first one. And sir, have you personally had some damage?
Yes, and I hear about it all the time also.
Okay, and are you not getting resolution?
Correct.
All right. We'll talk to you after the program. Maybe Fox 25 can work with you and see if we can help find some resolution for that. And let's find out in terms of, thank you. Let's find out about, Mr. Skinner, what are the long-term concerns about water? I can tell you, having spent time in California's Central Valley where they've had a water drought going on years, there's certainly a long-time concern, and neighboring jurisdictions are always worried about California stealing their water. Any idea what the prognosis is? I mean, today was a great day, of course.
Well, in fairness, the Oklahoma Water Resources Board is much better equipped to talk about water supplies and things like that than I am. I can tell you that in terms of water quality, as relates to oil and gas development, that has always been the #1 mandate for the Corporation Commission. Indeed, many of the things that are now considered to be the basis for environmental protection were actually rules developed back in the 30s by the Oklahoma Corporation Commission because of concerns about water quality.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Amini to step around or stay around after the event's over, because we have one or two people with insurance issues, and maybe he can provide some further guidance, like this gentleman, that if he's not getting resolution, we can take steps to find the right resolution for his particular concerns. It looks like we've run out of all of our questions that people wanted to ask for this evening. So you can see we've had considerable discussion, a lot of agreement as well as disagreement. But we hope tonight you found some answers to the questions you wanted to have asked. Now, certainly we're continuing the discussion later on our Facebook page about tonight's event, so log on at facebook.com/OKCFox. Tell us what you thought of tonight's town hall. I'm sorry, it's facebook.com/FoxOKC. Tell us what you thought of tonight's town hall. And of course, watch our late news for coverage of the town hall and all the day's breaking news. On behalf of our panel, our live audience, the fine crew of Fox 25, I'd like to thank you at home for joining us. And as always, we thank our military, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and other emergency personnel for their service to our communities and our nation. I'm Mark Hyman. Good night.
And thank you so much for joining us and being part of our Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall meeting.
Now you can watch this event again on our website at okcfox.com, or you can keep the discussion going on social media with the hashtag Your Voice, Your Future.